Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 12th, 13th installment of Chaos Under Heaven. Depends on whether or not you consider the last episode an installment. So that, economics, theory, and have a revolutionary discussion from a far left perspective. And excuse me, I am not very well rested. I hope I didn't break up too much there because my connection is still crap. I don't have that fiber optic cable. All of my money went to paying rents this last paycheck, but I will be running a fiber optic cable next stream. So anyways, hey, S4A, how are you doing, bud?
Good. How are you doing, fellow traveler?
I'm doing all right. I've been doing a lot of day drinking today, and I only slept a few hours last night. Not gonna lie, I didn't get very good sleep last night, but I'm doing the best I can, you know. I just I have a list of questions here, and it's a pleasure to speak with you, man. I've been looking forward to this for the last couple of weeks. So you started up a channel and you made this very, very brilliant and beautiful deconstruction of Vaush's fucking taken quotes from Marx, Engels, and Lenin out of context to basically reaffirm his position that you need to vote for Biden because, yeah, we gotta count our numbers, bro. We gotta see how many socialists we have, so what, and so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Were you going to say anything?
I mean, certainly I could. Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for the compliment. And about dropping out, I can hear you fine now. During your intro, when the music was playing, I probably only heard half of what you said, but I can hear you fine now. But yeah, the Vaush thing, I mean, I was hardly that was not an original thought of mine, but I saw Hakeem did something and several other socialist YouTubers had done a takedown of Vaush, and I know that there's an ongoing anti-Vaush thing going on with people, attacking him because he has a pretty big base of 200. Last time I checked, it was 206,000 people. It's hardly a focus of my life, but it's something I've noticed in terms of being involved with left media. And I think that, having somebody who clearly is influential, at least to his fans, and he, does have a couple 100,000 people listening to him, doing that kind of effectively anti-Marxist propaganda under the guise of, air quotes, teaching socialism is super harmful. He's hardly the most harmful person on the internet or anything like that, but he's worth putting on the list of people, who should be, it should be a matter of public record for anybody trying to learn socialism right now and, to get educated and organized in 2020 with capitalism having crisis after crisis. People are out there trying to figure out what to do, how to do it. And you have some dumbass, maybe plant, I don't know, whatever Vaush is out there spreading toxic garbage. And it should be a matter of public record. And there should be, plenty of posts out there on the internet saying, hey, are you a Vaush fan? You should definitely reconsider that because he's kind of feeding you a bunch of garbage. So.
Oh, yeah. So I actually was a fan of him for a short while, at least until he started shitting on this online community known as the Tankies. And I had a brief idea of what he was talking about, but what really turned me off to him was around the time he started supporting the Hong Kong protests and telling people to support the Hong Kong protests. And, he had this really long stream where he's just pushing all this, like all these anti-communist tropes and anti-communist propaganda. And he actually had a someone on who's defending the DPRK, but it was like this teenage kid who was like coked up on drugs or whatever. And he wasn't really able to make his points very well, and he was kind of freaking out. Well, anyways, what he said was, at the very end of that debate, he said something along the lines of, well, I just want you to know that even if the DPRK really was a workers' paradise and everything you say is true, I still wouldn't support them because optics. So, in other words, mass public appeal and winning the popularity contest and getting as many eyes on him as humanly possible is more important to him than holding a principled position on an important topic. And that speaks volumes about his character. Another thing that kind of speaks volumes is really like the stuff he did where he's like trying to take those quotes from Marx and Engels, like when they're telling us that we should support electoralism in general, and trying to like bastardize those quotes, or even quotes by Lenin when Lenin was saying we should support the British Labour Party and we should critically support them because they're a reformist movement. We should still support them because they want socialism, but they want to do it through reformist means, but they're going to fail. And there's a hard line difference between saying that you want to achieve socialism through reformist means and you want to vote for Hindenburg to stop Hitler. And that's the general argument that he's making. And last time I checked, fascist regimes generally don't come to power democratically. So these 2 points don't really run parallel with one another. It's kind of a false equivalence. And it just tells me he's just sort of like taking quotes from Marx and Engels out of context to trigger and own the tankies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, we're in an election year in the United States, which is never fun because, the election years are, for many people, kind of the only intersection point that they have with politics, political thinking, political consciousness, really of any kind. So, the big guns come out trying to work the public to get in line with one of the major parties. I mean, I feel like the Republican Party, there's not much danger there of appealing to anybody on the left. They're not really going to get a lot of votes there, maybe like a few percentage points for some reason or another. But this whole thing of the many, many ways that the Democrats and that the entire coalition, I'm not just talking about the DNC, but like there are many, many operatives. It is a coalition with many different little factions and tactics. And it's enough to make your head spin. And they've been building it for decades. They just come out of the woodwork and flood social media. I mean, before there was social media, it would be, different in-person groups or whatever, or like email lists or whatever before there was Facebook and Twitter. And the mental gymnastics that you see exhibited here and just the dishonest tactics for somebody who's more of a veteran and who's more educated in it. I mean, you can see through it. Even then it's exhausting. But, to somebody who's just coming up, I mean, I know for me, it took me like 10 years to kind of dissect and make myself a roadmap of just the landscape. So I think that what we're seeing now with channels like mine and yours and, many other good socialist YouTubers that are coming up, smaller channels, but are, building audiences and building a niche for ourselves. Is, we can act as a counterweight to that. And the biggest thing to me, I guess, not to like jump the gun on a topic that's been heavily on my mind, is just when you strip all of that away, when if you take just like a show of hands, like how many people are a socialist, you get a lot of hands now in 2020. I mean, Bernie Sanders did a lot to rehab the word for, which is something he got a lot of praise for, including, I'm sure I've said that at one time. But when you really strip down that audience of like people who identify as a socialist or something, how many people are what we would historically or on a global, kind of set of standards consider to be socialist, Marxist? I think it's a very small amount. You get a lot of anarcho whatevers, social democrats, and I think that that's the real challenge at this point. So people like Vaush doing this thing of like, let's support the Democrats who clearly are not socialist because XYZ, and then trying to play all these mind games with a semi-educated base. It's just, I don't know, it's really frustrating to me. So, I did what I could. The video is long that I did. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. But the reason it is so long was I was trying to model kind of how to think about it. I was just basically did my thought process out loud, showing people how to break down these arguments, why they're wrong in detail, because I think people need to develop those. I mean, you need the knowledge background. That's why it's important to do as much of the reading as you can, but also, to think critically and to use dialectics and, just be able to reason like that so that they can't get to you in the first place. Because there is a lot of it. And they, like I was saying, they have, 100 different ways to try to co-opt and soften revolutionary socialism.
Yeah, and this was a point that I reviewed in my video on hegemony, how the Democratic Party kind of like acts as a means to kind of rein in revolutionary fervor and populist fervor. People don't realize like a lot of like the reforms that we got in terms of like the welfare state came during a time when that sort of stuff didn't exist, and there was a great deal more organization and solidarity that existed amongst workers, as well as, a much greater understanding what socialism and communism was. I have my criticisms of the IWW and the CPUSA of old, and I have very staunch criticisms of that, but I also have some concerns. So my biggest question, and this is the burning question that I have, is how do we overcome the U.S. state apparatus? How do we overcome a settler, colonial, white supremacist, crypto-fascistic state apparatus that did genocide and ethnic cleansing before the Nazis, and basically overthrow a regime that is so entrenched, so embedded, and so cemented, like more so than most regimes on Earth? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the U.S. is the global home base of capitalism, and it has. I mean, City of London, Wall Street. The Anglo-U.S. axis is like the stronghold of global capitalism. I guess the term people are using now is the imperial core. On the inside of Fortress America and the first world imperialist countries, which are sucking up by force all the wealth of other countries. How do you organize in the United States? It's it's a huge question. I think anyone trying to answer that question should first of all, there's no simple answer to the implementation. I think that we should all understand that. If there's a simple answer to the implementation, or simple sort of overlapping with easy, it would have been done already. Like, there's a reason why we're in 2020 and we're 40 years into neoliberalism, which is, for anyone not familiar with the term, a return to classical liberalism or free market, unregulated, privatized capitalism, which is what it used to be in the 1800s, and then, as you mentioned, in the New Deal in the 1930s, we got social democracy, which is like regulated capitalism with taxation and some public services that redistribute some of the wealth, but keep a capitalist paradigm, a privately owned industry. Well, since the late 70s and 80s, the capitalists felt it was no longer advantageous to them, or not that it wasn't advantageous, but they no longer needed to uphold their end of the class peace that, as you mentioned, in the 30s, there was a lot of struggle. And the FDR faction of the U.S. 1% basically said, let's have a class peace. The capitalists can stay in power. We'll throw workers more of a bone, and we won't attack them. They won't attack us as much, et cetera. And that kind of lasted from the 30s, in various forms, from the 30s to like the 70s. And then about with the election of Reagan in 1980, started the assault on social democracy, on the class peace. And they've been walking back all of those programs. They've been making a major push. And you see this with the emergence of the Libertarian Party in the 1970s. This real push to like deregulate, privatize, and just do away with any form of social democracy, socialism, whatever. So how do we organize in this context? I think number one, you look at the history. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to interject. There's
Sure.
another thing that I want to add, but unions have been utterly squashed as well. Unionization rates in the United States have been declining for decades, coinciding with neoliberalism, and there's no more unions. We live in a service economy now where most people don't produce shit anymore. Most people are, servicing, merchandising, running around doing gig work. And I think of that context, does the service worker really wield the same power over the capitalist as the industrial worker? Because the industrial worker is the one that actually produces shit. So how can we organize? It's one of those things, like, we live in like the evil empire. Everyone's brainwashed into being complicit in the system. The tools that we used of yesteryear to combat that are now gone. So we have to come up with new strategies and organizing techniques. And I have no idea how we are going to do that in a context where everybody who does give a shit about politics either only cares about the culture war or identity politics or, like SJW type shit.
Yeah, those are definitely concerns facing any socialist trying to do organizing, because, as you rightly pointed out, labor unionization has been in decline for a number of decades. Actually about 60 years, so 6 decades. The peak of private sector union membership, public sector union membership is still decent. It's, I think, in the mid 30s, but the private sector unionization is about 7%. Whereas in, excuse me, getting choked up here. The peak was in about the year 1960. The private sector had about 30% unionization. So that has been, reduced by about 75% at this point, somewhere in that, in that range. So, and as we know, we look at every socialist coalition that has ever existed, labor unions have been a real part of it, right? The industrial proletariat in particular, but the trade unions have always been a significant factor. So how do we reestablish that? Well, first of all, like I said, looking at the history of it, as you mentioned before, there were major struggles in the 1900s, 19-teens, 1920s. In fact, in the 1920s, there was something called the Coal Wars, COAL Wars. This isn't something that's taught that much in history class, but there's a good movie called Matewan, Matewan, that is a dramatization of a battle during the Coal Wars. Basically, this was in Appalachia. There were shooting wars. It was the biggest armed conflict since the Civil War in the United States. It was basically, capitalists were opening up coal mines on their land, and, they had been very self-sufficient for like 100 years. Those families had lived in that area, and they were like, being asked to work these dangerous, health-destroying jobs for, peanuts. And they were trying to organize, and it really got to like armed conflict between, big shootouts between the goons, the Pinkertons, the private security of the capitalists, and the unions, the United Mine Workers, IWW, etc. So out of that context in the 1920s, heavy struggle. I mean, that's one example. There are also many strikes going on. In the 30s, many of the capitalists still were like, fuck them, we're just going to keep trying to crush them. The FDR wing was like, hey, why don't we, these strikes are getting seriously disruptive. Plus, they had seen revolution in Russia, from like 1917 to 1922. They're like, let's not have that happen here. And we don't want the more stubborn capitalists to screw everything up for everybody. So let's make some rules. Let's make a framework. Let's make a class truce or a class peace. And we can keep capitalism running more smoothly without risk of a revolution throwing the whole thing off. And unless you think that that is just me as a Marxist putting my spin on it, if you go read the National Labor Relations Act, which is what set up the National Labor Relations Board, which was really the beginning of the framework for industrial relations in this country, and how the rules for employers and labor unions to negotiate and follow. It says right in the beginning of that act that it's because stubborn capitalists are threatening the upset of the whole system. So in their own terms, that's why they set it up. Now, you keep getting good strikes in the 30s and the 40s. There's socialists, there's communists, like tons of stuff going on. There's also progressive reformers as well. What happens? World War II, obviously, and then the Allies win World War II. In Europe, because the Soviet Union had been so pivotal in defeating Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, communists became part of the ruling coalition, at least more of the ruling coalition than they had been. But in the United States, you had groups like CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States, thinking that they were going to be part of the accepted ruling coalition. And instead, we got McCarthyism in the late 40s and early 50s. And the Republican Party gained control of Congress for just 2 years. I believe it was 46 to 48, right after the war. And during that time, they passed the Taft-Hartley Labor Act. That basically took anything effective that labor unions were using in terms of tactics, like strike-wise. There's all different kinds of strikes. There's sit-down strikes, there's secondary strikes, solidarity strikes, etc. Taft-Hartley essentially made industrial unionism illegal. And what you saw after that was 1955, I believe, the CIO, which was kind of like a more mainstream, less radical, but similar version of the IWW, got wiped out. It got decimated because they also had that stupid, that McCarthyist pledge of like, I am not and have never been a member of the Communist Party. Like, radicals got completely rooted out of civil society completely at that point. Like, you used to be able to more of an extent, say you were a radical labor organizer. With McCarthyism, it was such a chilling effect that like all the Hollywood blacklists started. This was that time. So the CIO.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait, you mean to tell me? You mean to tell me that America didn't respect free speech for a period of time? That there was certain speech that wasn't allowed? And that certain people had to be censored out of fear of subversion for the system? Whoa, oh my! That sounds like totalitarianism, doesn't it? Is it like, so when the Soviets do it, it's totalitarianism, but when America does it, it's freedom. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, around this time, we start getting the rise of the new left, which we'll start getting to that in just a minute. But this is still the defeat of the old left, essentially. And yeah, of course, I mean, the United States, capitalism in general, but especially the United States being probably the most vicious bastion of capitalism on earth. The United States ruling class has showed a penchant for brutality that you didn't see in Europe. I mean, you saw brutality, but the capitalists, it was just a slightly different version of the system, whereas the United States never really had the monarchy. I mean, the United States was formed out of, former colonies, but really the United States national identity started with, we're this country owned by capitalists, whatever, and, that's more or less in the Constitution. You got to own property and all this stuff. And also much, much larger employers in the United States. What was considered a large capitalist when it came to like industrial capitalism, owning factories and stuff in Europe, it was a few hundred workers maybe made you a large capitalist. In the United States, it was like 10 times the size. So these people had much more money, much more power, and just a much more cavalier attitude. So yeah, it's free speech as long as you're not challenging the fundamentals of capitalism, and that's something we see over and over and over again. But so after McCarthyism, it leads directly to that union decline because the CIO gets wiped out to the point their membership shrank so much that today it's AFL-CIO, but those used to be independent organizations. And they didn't just join because they were like, oh, we have so much in common, let's join. AFL was always a much more conservative union that in fact would scab against other unions. Read IWW history to see that history of AFL union scabbing. AFL basically swallowed CIO because CIO got so small, and then they just basically got, not bought up, because that's not exactly how it works, but they got subsumed by the AFL. So that's, I think, 55. 5 years later, the IWW almost ceased to exist. And anybody who doesn't know the IWW, the Wobblies, industrial workers of the world, they were like an explicitly anti-capitalist revolutionary union. They're also the first union to organize multiracial groups of workers together, which was illegal.
I know that there were like racial tensions between unions and so on, and there was like a lot of racism that went on in like the traditional workers union or movement. And not only that, but that aren't the IWW anarcho-syndicalist in nature? I'm pretty sure there's like strong anarcho-syndicalist presence in the IWW. And there's a great question that I'd like to address here in a sec. Sure. But what were you going to say in response?
Oh, yeah. So the IWW wasn't always. I would say, in fact, they were probably more like classical Marxist. They were formed in 1905, so really before Marxism, Leninism became a thing. I would say if you read early IWW stuff, I personally love it. Eugene Debs was one of the founders. I have a few speeches from Eugene Debs up on the Socialism for All channel. And they're great. I love early Eugene Debs. It's funny to hear Bernie Sanders reference that he's a fan of Eugene Debs, because you listen to a Bernie Sanders speech, you listen to a Eugene Debs speech, Sanders doesn't hold a candle to Debs. It's not even close. I mean, Debs was a fiery orator who really, talked about labor like freeing themselves from the chains of bondage and all that kind of stuff. Definitely not the kind of, mealy-mouthed language Sanders uses. Although Sanders is a step up from most politicians today.
What I was going to say about that is it's so messed up, too, how Sanders is considered a radical when really all he's proposing are, Band-Aids on the system as is. He's not a true radical. He's not really saying, like, we need to completely change the system. He's just saying the rich need to pay more taxes and we need to redistribute the wealth because the economy is a little too top-heavy. And it's kind of sad how we went from figures like Eugene Debs and like Anne Louise Strong and these other famous American socialists to like Bernie Sanders and AOC, who are like completely complicit in the system. It is very, very, very sad. And here's the question that I want to pull up right here by Against the River. But I'm sure we have different responses to this, but he's asking how and why did Ronald Reagan win the elections?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind, so the Republicans use dirty tricks that unfortunately work too often. We can talk about a lot of different things in terms of left liberals and how they suck and like how they have fucked us over, and particularly the Democratic Party. But let's not forget that while the Democratic Party tends to be what we as socialists do more battle with and interface with more, that there's like a solid third of the United States that is a reactionary fucking cinder block that is just like glowing with just it is steeped in the fires of hatred, every kind of like prejudice you can imagine. And so, the Republican Party has had that as its base. They ran something called the Southern Strategy in the after World War II, which was pretty much like an explicitly racist neo-Confederate strategy. They've since apologized for it, but then Donald Trump basically resurrected it. So in the 70s, you had Carter, and there were the gasoline shortages. People were like waiting in line for hours, for like maybe not hours, but like 1 or 2 hours just to fill up their gas tank for their car.
But wait. Shortages under capitalism? No way. Shortages only happen under socialism, dog. What are you talking about?
Amazingly, it is possible. Much longer conversation is Richard Nixon in the early 70s and the Bretton Woods Treaty, which had previously stabilized currencies using a basket of like 15 or 20 different major commodities. I mean, it's still capitalism, so there were bumps in the road. There's always the boom and bust. But after World War II, in an effort to compete actually with the USSR and with, the developing, air quotes, second world of like socialist Marxist countries, the Western capitalists were like, look, we got to stabilize capitalism. It's part of that class peace thinking that I mentioned earlier. And so they came up with this Bretton Woods stabilization agreement that, is generally better. Nixon representing, some of the first story, but yeah, there were pretty severe shortages in the 70s. Carter was also not the most necessarily charismatic president. Another factor I would throw in there is racism. So there was, in the late 60s, we had the civil rights struggle. And then there was a lot more forced racial integration. And there were a lot of racist white blue-collar workers who were maybe supporting Democrats previously for the economic stuff because they were like union people. But they were like, hey, these like N-words are being bussed into my neighborhood. Not my thinking, but, that's what they would have said at the time. And the Republican Party knew how to chisel off a lot of the more racist blue-collar white workers into the Reagan coalition. You also had more of the like yuppie Reagan Democrats. So Reagan came out there with a new vision. He was like, look, we've had this class peace for like 40 years from 35 to 75, late 30s to late 70s. Here I'm running. He offered a new vision. And to people who are naive, they're just like, okay, he's got a new vision. Let's try it. And so anyway, to answer the question, I think that is some of the major factors in how Reagan got elected.
I have an answer of my own, and I think this is a fact that you didn't mention, but an important one. Everything you said was very prevalent, but one thing that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that during the 1960s and 1970s, this is when unionization and workers' rights were at their strongest. A person making $3 an hour in the year 1968 is making roughly $20 an hour today, if you account for inflation. Well, what happened is you have all these people who were a part of essentially a labor aristocracy who were making all types of money, all types of cash. And then you have Reagan come around during the 1980s, and he promises to do these tax cuts and deregulations, and you have all these labor aristocrats and all these like professional middle class types who've made their money, they've saved up their money, they've made their money, and now Reagan comes along promising all these economic policies that will make them even richer, tax cuts and deregulations. So he opens up a broad milestone of opportunity for people who have capital, who own capital, who have saved up capital, the sect of the working class that have acted traditionally as a populist base for liberal ideology. And it is this sect, i.e. the boomers, no offense, S4A, who've made their money in the 60s and 70s, and after they made their money through their manufacturing jobs, they went back to reinvest, to become landlords, to become small to medium mid-income business owners, and so on. And Reagan strongly facilitated that, and he strongly facilitated the emergence of neoliberalism, which this sect of the population benefited from. So a solid top 20% of earners, 30% of earners ended up becoming his beneficiaries. And these are the people that acted as Reagan's populist base. And these people are still alive today. They're in their 50s and 60s and 70s. And they are very, very fond of Ronald Reagan for this reason. So now you have a sect of the population, these liberals, who have a very, very toxic upbringing and a very, very toxic ideology as a result of seeing the best of both worlds, so to speak, the best of the social democratic era and the best of the neoliberal era. And what do you think of that?
Oh yeah, I agree. That's some of what I was like getting at with like the yuppies, and like you're exactly right. There was in prior to the New Deal, in the just looking at the 20th century, the 1900s, teens, 20s, there was massive hardship. I mean, kids in coal mines, you couldn't afford a house, you'd live in like a Skid Row shack, like etc. There was serious hardship. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there were all these regulations and programs to make it easier to buy a house, to make it easier to go to college, etc. And absolutely, like with that combined with, it was easier to have a good paying job because unionization was so good. I mentioned that the unions peaked at 1960 with 30%, but even though only 30% of the private sector was directly in a union, the other, even non-unionized companies had to compete with those standards. So they also would keep their pay and benefits high because they didn't want their workers to unionize. So they were kind of paying to keep the union out in that sense. So yeah, it was this fabulous time that basically, social democracy, a more stable form of capitalism, a more prosperous form of capitalism, created prosperity. And then what did the neoliberals do? They came in and fucking privatized those gains, and they fucking pocketed them. And now we coming up, and I'm not a boomer, by the way. So boomer's a mindset anyway, but I'm not in the age group. So like you said, the boomers became landlords because it was so cheap, and let's say not cheap, affordable. There were regulations on the economy, so prices were decent, and there were regulations on the workplace and unions to fight for workers, so the pay was good. So yeah, they got a good deal. There was a lot of affordable shit. They bought it up, and then boom, in the 80s, 90s, privatize everything, and then for millennials coming up and later Gen X, we're faced with a situation where things aren't affordable. And the boomers still have this mindset like, oh, just buy 3 houses like I did. Oh, just work for it like I did. And it's like, dude, nothing's the same because you privatized it and stripped all of the, all the protections out. You stripped all the regulations out. You stripped all the unions out. And, as we were talking about before, that kind of, I think McCarthyism was, you could say it was like, if you think of like a bird in the air, like climbing in altitude, the Taft-Hartley Act kind of shot the bird, but by sheer momentum, it goes up a little while and then peaks. And then, it peaks at 1960 and has been like plummeting down to earth ever since. You can't fucking start a union. You know, there was a poll that showed that 50% of workers in the US would join a labor union if one started in their workplace. Well, then, so why aren't, you know, a majority of workplaces unionized? Because the fucking process is so difficult. It's so favored towards the employer that it's, and Democrats have been saying they're going to pass card check, which would be a major process-oriented help to forming a union easier. It would basically be if you get a majority of people off the bat, you don't have to wait and have an election. You would just get it recognized right there and then, and the employer wouldn't be able to drag it out, terrorize people, fire organizers, then hold the election after they've actually like fired everybody who supported the union.
You know,
so that's the environment we're working in now. Boomers exploited it, and we're being handed the leftovers, the bones that they pick clean.
Yeah, exactly. The consequences of that. Am I bringing up?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I had a couple questions that I wanted to go over, but I mean, yeah, I've actually tried to do union talk and like workers organization talk in a few of the last workplaces I've been in, and nobody wants to do it because they're all afraid that if they try to step out of line and like unionize or organize or do, you know, actual class struggle, they're all terrified that they're going to lose their job. And mind you, these are people who owe money on rent. These are people that have children, that have families. These are people that their livelihoods are attached to this job, and they don't want to take the risk because they're making just enough to get by, but they don't have anything in the bank. They're just barely making it by, and they don't want to stick their neck on the line to improve their livelihoods because they're afraid that their livelihoods will be ruined if they do that in the first place. And that's what makes this so difficult for me, because I've tried to unionize before. I've tried to call union reps and tried to organize workplaces in the past. I've tried to do this shit, and what you were talking about is exactly right. It is very, very difficult in this day and age to do any sort of worker organizing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I mean, Obama said he was going to pass card check. So just real quick on that process. So basically right now to get, I mean, you can, you know, like the IWW today, which is a topic I have written down just because you mentioned the anarcho-syndicalism thing earlier. The IWW today talks about what they call solidarity unionism, which used to be called minority unionism. It's when you don't actually have your workplace formally organized under law, but you get a few coworkers together, and then you use what tactics you can get away with just as direct action to like gain more power. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that workers should do, you know, find a buddy at work, at least one who, you know, you can actually like concretely cover each other's backs and like win whatever gains that you can, even if they're little things like more schedule stability or something. You absolutely should do that, and there's techniques for it. But like actually flipping your whole workplace to be like legally unionized, the normal process is there's something called A cards, authorization cards. It's basically a little card that just says, I, so-and-so, am a worker of this company, and I authorize such and such union to represent me in collective bargaining. So the process is basically, if you can get 30% of your bargaining unit, like your department or your whole workplace or whatever, you can get 30% of them to sign A cards. That's enough to trigger the National Labor Relations Board to hold a union election. And then at the election, if you get 50% plus one, then it's recognized, and the employer has to engage in good faith negotiating with your union collectively. Can't do one-on-one anymore from that point on. What card check would do is, if you surpass the 30%, and you get 50% off the bat, like if you can just hand in A cards for 50% plus one, you would just bypass the election, and they just do a card check, an A card check, and you just be like, well, if we held the election today, you would win the election. Therefore, boom, no, you know, we'll just call it there, and the employer would have to recognize you. This would be such a simple reform, and even that the Democrats won't pass. You know, Bernie Sanders was talking about repealing sections of Taft-Hartley. I think we should repeal the entire thing. because it just totally neutered the labor movement. But to what you were talking about, the service economy, how hard it is to organize, it's absolutely true. U.S. workers want unions. The process is too hard, and we need to do things about that. One other note, just before we move on subject-wise, talking about the IWW and how they are very syndicalist now. Like I said, I think they started out more Marxist, actually. The IWW was a massive force in the 1900s, 19-teens. They unfortunately, well, first of all, the first Red Scare in the late teens was massive. They were just literally putting like Italian and Eastern European workers on the East Coast, like on boats, and just literally shipping them back to Europe, no questions asked. Like, that's how bad it was. So the first Red Scare definitely took a toll, the Palmer raids on the IWW. But also the IWW had many, well, I won't say many, but 2 or 3 significant internal splits between more anarchist factions, more socialist factions. And every time they did that, their number got like cut in half. They wound up very ineffective. Like I said, the union basically ceased to exist for a few months in 1960. And what it has been since 1960 is kind of a ragtag activist organization. They do a few unions here and there, but it's like nothing like it was. I mean, I wish them well, but they're so dogmatically anarchist. I mean, the whole left, whether you're Marxist, Leninist, or whatever, the whole left is like struggling, to say the least. But yeah, today they're very dogmatically anarchist, but I would not say that they always were.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm sorry, I kind of zoned out there for a second, but
Sorry.
All right, no, it's good. My attention span is waning. I'm sorry.
I remember the 4 hours of sleep thing now. Yes.
Yeah, no, ADD plus 4 hours of sleep plus day drinking that is still going on to this very moment. But
well, you were. Let's just say until you mentioned it, I had completely forgotten. So.
No, it's all good. But anyways, I actually have a couple topics that I want to go over. I don't really want this to run more than like an hour and a half, but okay. So strategy is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, like the kind of work that we can do now. Obviously, repealing those laws that make it a pain in the fucking ass for us to organize. Repealing those is a big one. I feel like they're pretty cemented, and I feel like at this point there's not much we can do outside of like fucking PPW, if you know what I mean, to resist. But I mean, I don't really want to suggest anything outside the bounds of the law. So for now, let's just stick with what we can do legally. There's a lot of stuff I can suggest illegally, but I don't want to do it on this stream, or frankly on this channel in general. I don't want to get accused of being a glowy, but yeah, no. What can we do legally to resist the system now?
So I'll say 2 things. One, a general comment, and then one specific to that, and then we can probably like address things more specifically through that. So the general comment, what I see for the United States in 2020, I've been doing left activism for a while. I would say seriously for about 15 to 20 years. What I think is going to happen, meaning when we talk about, what do we do now, it's important to think about what is probably likely to happen by our best guess. I mean, nobody knows the future. And, there's that Lenin quote about there are decades when nothing happens and then, weeks when a whole decade happens. And, you just don't know. And there is a lot of the waiting game for sure, which is something I'm not great at, but it's just something I have to acknowledge as like part of the system. Or just part of the flow of history, let's say. So certainly 2020 has been an eventful year. I think that the instability is going to continue. I think that the economic breakdown that we're seeing right now is not going to let up. It's both something fundamental to capitalism, like the kind of thing that we saw in 2008. That happens every 10 to 15 years. Marx and Engels wrote about it. It's just a feature of capitalism. So we were due for another crash in 2020 since the last one was '08. But then on top of it, we have COVID, which is going to be depressing business, especially small business, which is kind of like the backbone of the U.S. economy and not just the U.S. economy, but the idea of the, quote, American dream of like, I'm going to open up a little shop or whatever. Well, now you don't have that dream anymore. So I think that in itself will have consequences ideologically and terms of morale, but economically, I think we're just going to see even more instability in the next 5 years than we saw between 2008 and 2013. So I think that's an important thing that's going to be driving things going forward. And that's something that is not even something the ruling class can control, really. I think it's way outside of the U.S. ruling class's hands. Also, I started S4A technically last year, started really plugging it this year. I think if we do what we're doing now, we could be in a quasi-revolutionary situation by 2030. So that's my goal in terms of what do we do. Now, recognizing that the instability is just going to keep going and going, I'm not sure that passing laws is like really going to be a major thing. I mean, you'd love to see it. You'd love to see a Bernie Sanders get in and make it easier to form unions, for example. We as Marxists would still have the task of going from trade union consciousness to revolutionary consciousness, but I think it's easier to do that with organized workers than with completely unorganized workers. So you'd like to see that, but what do we actually see? There's like the DSA, Justice Democrats type of thing, and not so far a lot of third parties getting elected. What have the Justice Democrat DSA axis given us so far? Not a lot, to be honest. I mean, in 2010, when the Tea Party, the libertarian counterpart, pseudo-populist Tea Party took power, they were backed by a lot of money, and they got like 100 seats in Congress in one election cycle. DSA Justice Dems got like 8 or something. I mean, it's like half a dozen. It's really not many. It's like AOC, Ilhan Omar, and like Rashida Tlaib, a couple other people, not enough to really do anything with, because the entire rest of the Democratic Party pretty much is against them, or even if they say that they're with them, they don't actually vote with them or support anything that they do. I did a video about all of the candidates who signed on to Medicare for All, and then literally never mentioned it again on their Twitter feed or anything else. So you have kind of this movement, as you're mentioning about Bernie Sanders, you have a movement against neoliberalism. We shouldn't confuse that with a movement for socialism, though. There's a movement kind of to go back to social democracy like we had in the 60s and 70s. Yeah, I don't think that, yeah, go ahead.
I would argue that movement.
Oh, I don't think that that's possible.
Reactionary in a sense, because a lot of those people.
I think you might be dropping out. Okay, I don't hear anything, so I'll just talk for a minute. So you have the kind of Bernie Sanders, Rose Twitter, social democratic.
They want to go back.
Sorry, I literally didn't hear anything you said until just a sound just now. I hear typing.
Kill me. I want to die. I want. Anyways, what I was trying to say is it's reactionary in the sense that a lot of the people that support it are fantasizing and fetishizing a time that's not coming back. The conditions and circumstances and social, like, systematic pressures that made the 1950s, 60s, and 70s Cold War boom like possible are gone. Those conditions are gone, and people think we can just bring back manufacturing. Why are these companies want to go from Mexico, where people are, making $2 an hour making shit, and come back to the United States where people are making $20 an hour? They're not going to do that. The whole economy still operates on the laws of capital and markets and profitability, and that's the reason why it fundamentally won't work. and why we need to build like a genuine socialist movement and why people actually need to understand what it is. And one thing that scares me is like we live in an ADD generation. People don't really have attention spans anymore. So you got to be able to explain things and make it entertaining to people at the same time. Otherwise, most people aren't going to pay attention or give a shit. It's just, I'm just trying to say, I'm not trying to be a doomer here. It's very, 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 very tough. And I'm sure
it's just a bad situation.
it fucking sucks, dude. And it's really depressing. It's one of the reasons why I fucking drink is because like people just don't give a shit. I talked to this guy at my job and we're working together and he's like talking about how he works 50 to 60 hours a week. I'm kayaking with this dude. He's talking about how like he works like 60 hours a week to pay all his bills and shit. And I try to explain how there's a better way. There's like socialism. And he's like telling me that, you know, I don't want that because I take pride in earning my keep and getting what I deserve and all that. Like this person, and it's so sad. There are some people that are just so complicit in the system, they can't imagine any alternatives. And that's part of the reason why I go to the bottle is because of how fucking depressing our situation is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I mean, I think that we as Marxists, like people who do understand how the system works, we can really see it clearly. It is not a pretty sight. And, you know, we do need to support each other. I mean, one of the things about being in far left groups, like if you do join a group or whatever, a lot of the people are really angry. That can just be a difficult thing. You know, there's a lot of infighting on the left. Some of this is substantive. A lot of it, I think, is just people who made it over to the far left are aware enough, conscious enough of capitalism and, you know, class conscious enough to be really aware of how this is a horrible situation. I mean, you're aware of a system that is fundamentally based on exploitation and pain. And I think that we should, you know, be there for each other. That doesn't mean, you know, tolerating, you know, obvious rad lib kind of attacks on Marxism. You know, I mean, the word would be revisionism, but I mean, I think revisionism, it's one of those things, it's almost like the left version of un-Americanism. It can mean almost, you know, if you use it too liberally, it can mean almost anything. But I mean, you know, while we shouldn't tolerate massive softening of the revolutionary spirit of Marxism, and this is something Lenin talks about in State and Revolution, I think right in the preface or right in the first chapter, he talks about how, you know, liberals and even socialists sometimes like are always trying to like soften and make more palatable that revolutionary nature. It is just, it's hard to be a Marxist. Just, it is fucking difficult to be class conscious and not to like hit the bottle. It fucking hurts.
I do it mostly to cope, but admittedly, I only do it a couple times a week. But I understand in the grand scheme of things, we will win. Right now, we're eating a lot of shit, but we're not always going to eat shit. There have been plenty of periods throughout history in many different countries where we have been winning. We're losing right now because, as Joseph Stalin said, we are living in the era of blackest reaction. We are eventually going to emerge from that era of blackest reaction much stronger and much better than we are now. But in the time being, I am going to fucking drink to cope with it. But besides that, what I'm interested in now is the strategies I propose for making the world a better place while we are. That's part of the reason why this channel exists, and that's the reason why I do the advocacy that I do now. I still do activism. I still do the important work that I do now. I mean, albeit not much as I used to because of COVID, but I also run this channel. I have a couple essays planned. I have more work planned. Ultimately, I'd like to really update the Marxism 101 series and really, really break down what Marx is all about to the general public, to the point to where like a 5-year-old can understand what Marxism is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to write, do a channel, like whatever's within your capacity, because I find the more you write, the more it helps to just clarify your own thought, because when you actually go to like make the sentence, make the paragraph, make the page, you're thinking critically about what you're writing. It will spur you to come up with new research questions for yourself. I think that it really helps the education process. So I encourage everybody to do that. Also, on the subject of coping, I encourage people to find a kind of meditation. You don't have to get like deeply into, mysticism or anything, but, pick up a Tai Chi or something like that, because it honestly, it's not going to fix all your problems, but that's one of the ways that I cope is through meditation. It honestly, I still have rough days, but it has probably cut the edge down by about 50%. So something I recommend.
Meditation is fun. Meditation's good. There are certain things that I do to cope outside of alcoholism that I won't really mention on air, but there is one thing that I'd like to mention. Communism is not inevitable. I disagree. No, shut up. I completely disagree. It is inevitable. It is inevitable because either the human race will go extinct, we go extinct because of our own douchebaggery and ignorance, and then the fucking ferrets evolve, or the beavers evolve. Either the beavers or the ferrets. Whoever is the most clever, that species evolves and develops super intelligence, and then they go through their own societies: slave society, feudal society, capitalist society. And they come to the same conclusions we did. They see the remnants of our civilization, and then the ferrets and the beavers realize capitalism blows dick. So one way or another, our system is going to prevail, whether or not humans achieve it, or the ferrets or the beavers achieve it. So I can die in comfort knowing that communism is inevitable, whether the monkeys do it or the ferrets do it, as goofy as that sounds.
Well, I think we could definitely call that playing the long game for sure.
Yeah, by several million years.
Yeah. But, in terms of, what do we do? I think we somehow or other, which is something we can get into, need this to become a mass movement. We had signs earlier this year of spontaneous outbreaks of unrest. I mean, we saw that with Occupy 2, that got a little bit organized. There were some demands made.
Oh yeah, or the George Floyd protests were.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
not just like the state that it happened in, but all the states in the country, and like even countries outside of the United States were doing solidarity protests, like Japan, South Korea, several countries in Africa, China. You had all these countries, like even in Europe, everywhere was acting in solidarity. And this is one of the things that has me holding on, is like the existence of the internet, like the fact that we're all connected more than ever before, and we have an evolved sense of morality and empathy. And when we see like an injustice, when we see a man who's strangled to death in broad daylight in the wake of everything that's happening now, how can you not go out and protest? How can you not go out and show solidarity? Because what is going on in the United States, at least in regards to like criminal justice, is utter bullshit. And you got all the other problems going on, people being unemployed, you've got the moratoriums expiring, you've got the rampant homelessness. Wait until that homelessness epidemic kicks in, dude. You're going to see the George Floyd protests times 50.
I agree. And what we as Marxists need to do is, first of all, understand, as much as I would love for everyone to read theory, as they teach in China and Vietnam, etc. Like, you will actually learn Marxism as part of your primary education. We're never going to get to that point in this country until we, the fringe Marxists, we take those spontaneous uprisings that are going to happen, because capitalism is not going to stop being capitalism. Capitalism is not going to stop generating these crises. But what we need to do is keep hammering on the class character of these protests, of what's causing the protests, because like you said, they are happening. There are solidarity protests around the world. The more that we can keep hammering on capitalism is what's causing all of this, and capitalism is a global phenomenon and a global crisis. the more and more that we can turn these from single issue protests into general, anti-capitalist protests with specific planks, like whether it's police brutality or whether it's the foreclosure and eviction crisis, etc. We as Marxists, the point is always to take, the working class spontaneously is going to develop trade union consciousness. They will try to, within the existing system, get better benefits, better conditions for themselves. But they're not necessarily going to think outside of capitalism. That is our job as Marxists. So what do? We take emerging mass movements and mass trends and keep agitating and propagandizing on the class character of them until that is widely understood by everyone. People who haven't read Marx, Lenin, Engels, etc. We're never going to get everybody to read them, but those of us who have to keep, obviously we should encourage anybody who has the capacity to do so. But those of us who have to keep, agitating on that class character, and it will catch on. But, between now and then and when it becomes a sustained movement, like I said, I think that that's possible in 10 years from now. I use the hashtag Revolution 2030. We'll see if it becomes a thing. But I think that that's what we can do. So the Bernie movement was an opportunity for that. It's just one step in the process, though. And, we're back to a point where Bernie fucking quit. He dropped out. So that particular opportunity has stopped. Then we had the George Floyd protest moment, which I know there's still some protests going on, but largely has stopped. But there will be another moment. Then we as Marxists come back out, keep pointing out the connection between capitalism and whatever crisis is going on. And we go that way until that, Marxism itself becomes the movement.
Hey, I have a theory. So I have this theory behind how the next wave of civil unrest will occur. So there's a study that shows that you have a bunch of monkeys and you feed these monkeys bananas, for performing various tasks, but you feed, this one or a few monkeys tapioca, and you keep feeding them tapioca as a reward versus all these other monkeys. And that one monkey, once you feed him bananas after feeding him tapioca for a while, after a certain point you give him the bananas, he's like, fuck that, I want the tapioca. And where I'm going with this is human beings are very similar in a way. Living standards have been elevated a great deal, and there's a standard by which people live. And once you take that away, once people aren't able to even get food stamps, or they're not able to get the means of subsistence they need in order to survive off the current system, you will see mass rebellion on a scale that hasn't been witnessed since the French Revolution or October Revolution. I hold strong of the opinion that we are 3 meals away from a revolutionary situation. And I hold that stance now. And I think that's ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to have another recession in 2025 and in 2030. We're going to continue to have these recessions. The recoveries are going to be longer. The depressions are going to be worse. And the recovery, like I said, longer recoveries, and worse depressions, longer depressions. And, different economists, like good economists, have talked about this. And I think over the course of this, as well as climate change and increasing income inequality and all the issues that are already transpiring right now, are going to compound. And I think there's going to be a lot more civil unrest over the 2020s. And I think you're going to see a lot more street brawls, a lot more shootings, the kind of clashes you see between Antifa and the Proud Boys are just going to become common, everyday life in America over the course of the 2020s. And I think as people become more and more radicalized because the current system isn't working for them, as the current system isn't providing them the living standards that they're used to, you are going to end up with either socialism or fascism as a revolutionary force.
Yeah, So kind of coming from that backwards a little bit, I had an incursion on the Socialism for All Facebook page about a month ago. It was actually the time of the Kyle Rittenhouse Kenosha shooting. I posted up some shit post, just basically like it was definitely bait, and definitely it worked as bait, but kind of mocking people who were fetishizing, Rittenhouse or lionizing him, calling him a hero, in a very crass kind of way. Anyway, got posted into some libertarian group, and I got a flood of like literally 500 chuds coming into the page. But I actually talked to some of these people, and a couple of them who were capable of speech anyway, and it's like these people literally have no clue what they're advocating for. I don't think that they're going to be the first people we radicalize, but like I think that there is some outside chance, like even there's some hope for, like they're not, and that's not my main point. So this isn't like an alt-right rehab thread by any means, but I talked to some of these people and they're like, oh yeah, well, like I don't believe in cops and I want a world without cops. And I'm like, well, you literally advocate a system which can't function without cops. And they were like, huh? They hadn't even considered it before. So I'm just saying, like, we never know who we're going to convert. So just keep putting it out there, I guess, is my message about that. But what you were saying before about the street brawls, that's when I was talking about instability from 2020 to 2030. I fully agree. What started happening in the mid 2010s, about 5 years ago, with the Antifa versus Proud Boys or other, like Unite the Right, those rallies. I think that those are going to get more frequent and of longer duration until, like you said, there's just an indistinct start and end point, and they just become part of the regular background, at which point it will be, undeniable that there's a massive degree of turmoil and instability. And, the United States is already in, with all the mass shootings and everything, what some researchers call a protracted state of civil conflict, which could be upgraded. I don't think civil war is going to solve any of our problems. I don't think civil war is being introduced by anyone for constructive reasons. I think it's just a byproduct. I think all this violence is just a byproduct of the economic instability. So Trump got into, go ahead.
Oh, all I was going to say is I'm not predicting civil war, just more terrorism and civil unrest. Do not confuse what I have to say, because your average weekend warrior, your civil guardsman or American guardsman, is not going to want to turn guns on his fellow countrymen, regardless of what, the MIC or the government might have you think. In all seriousness, I don't think civil war is coming. I think it would require a lot more instability for that to happen. But yeah, no, I don't believe civil war is coming. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, well, when I say that, I don't mean it in a necessarily a conventional way, but I think a level of instability and violence where, for example, travel might become unsafe in certain regions, at least. Like you could see maybe even in rural areas, like sabotaging of roads or things like that. Like, we're not there yet, and I hope we don't get to that point. I don't think it would be good for anyone, because it would be mostly just workers attacking workers for the most part, would be the largely the casualties. But I think that it's the economic instability driving it. So the sooner and more effectively that we as Marxists can get out there and do what we need to do, like I said, agitating on the class character of the instability, the sooner we can get somewhere constructive with this. And of course, the capitalists will, deliberately, have reaction against that. But what I was going to say is, you were talking before about bringing back the manufacturing, et cetera. So that's kind of been the only, even when we did have a strong labor movement in the United States, it's always been kind of, thick-headed in the sense of like, buy union, buy USA, essentially kind of reactionary in character. reactionary in the not meaning they have a knee-jerk reaction as people use it, but in the Marxist sense of you're trying to go from a later stage of capitalism to an earlier stage of capitalism, or turning back the wheel of history. That's reactionary. It's not possible. So bringing back manufacturing, it's not going to happen, nor should we want it. Industry, the technology has developed to a point where way fewer workers, less labor, fewer labor hours are needed to produce the same thing. And we should just be enjoying the gains from that. The reason we're not is capitalists owe us nothing legally. You know, they have no legal obligation to share that increased productivity with us, which would be part of a socialist economy where that redistribution or just not stealing that labor at the point of production would be baked into the system. In capitalism, it's not baked in, and the goods and services that workers produce are the private property of the capitalists who have the piece of paper owning the workplace. But this, I would like to bring in at this point China, because this is honestly, for me, a cause of hope. The kind of conflict that I see socialism in China, yes, China has about a third of its economy is private, 2/3 of it are public. About 2 out of every 3 workers in China works for the government. So it is largely majority a public economy. And, there are many active Marxists with positions of power in China. What I see them as doing is basically letting Western capitalists in under and they will let them make some profits there by building their shit and selling it on the world market. But they're also building in clauses where they have to basically all of their IP, like the artificially intelligent technology that they use in the factories, becomes like property of the Chinese government. To me, that is the old thing of capitalists selling us the rope that we will use to hang them. Because while capitalists must, under the system of the profit mandate, in order to stay in competition with each other, they have to make profit short term. Whereas I see a socialist government letting them in, taking their technology and then using it against them 10 or 20 years from now. So that's a way that we can look at a socialist effort in manufacturing where, in a way, the manufacturing labor force does get decimated due to AI. But because it's in the right hands, the working class ultimately doesn't suffer. Now, we haven't seen the complete counterassault by China yet. However, we are already seeing floods, just go on eBay, floods of cheap, virtually free goods being dumped onto the US and other capitalist markets that Western capitalists trying to turn a profit can't compete with. So I think in a way, it's the old "we will bury you" thing. China is producing so much stuff. Now, some of it I wish was better quality, although some of it already is. But they're flooding the world market with stuff that is basically going to drown the capitalists. So I do see some cause for hope there that isn't just buy union, bring the jobs home kind of a thing.
Yeah, another thing with China is, believe it or not, only like 1/3 of their population are actually proletarianized. You have large swaths of the Chinese that still live a subsistence agrarian lifestyle. The reason why they're growing so fast is because they have room to grow. They have a very large, massive population. And I think as time goes on, they'll continue to grow rather fast, operating within the context of state capitalism. And they'll continue to flood, global markets with their cheap commodities, like you said. And I think it's really going to be like the year 2050, the 2050s, where capitalism as a system will enter a crisis from which it will no longer return. But I do want to kind of rein things in a bit.
Sure. If I could make one more comment along those lines, I forgot to mention.
Yeah. Go.
There's the cheap, that flood of cheap physical goods. There's also the internet, which has been more disruptive to capitalism because you can't. I mean, they find ways to sell people's data and stuff like that. That's, to me, grasping at straws, though. It's just marketing. It's kind of, it's a house of cards. But the anything that can be digitized has been digitized and is being shared somewhere for free. That's been massively disruptive, and to me, again, can only lead to burying existing capitalism under stuff it can't compete with. I'm good with wrapping up. There was a comment from a viewer that I didn't make a note of that I didn't want to let slip by.
What was the comment?
I don't know. Whoever that was, I want to say it was somebody named, I don't know. But I completely missed a comment that went by.
Well, can you describe what the context of it was?
I don't remember at all. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, if you can find it, go ahead and we can address it. But I want to address a little.
Oh, there it is. Wait a minute. Oh, by Jenny Lynn. I didn't even see this little tab. Let's see. I can't see which one was the comment that popped up on the screen.
All right, well, I can try to find it. Hold on a second. There's a bit of discussion going on. You don't have to agree with people completely in order to respect them. There's some great anarchists out there, yes. Sock them. Danielle, if it's the same guy. I'm just looking exclusively at her comments, by the way, just a heads up. I don't see it, man.
Okay.
Well, anyways, so what I was going to say is the value of electoralism. This is the topic that I kind of want to close on.
That was in the title. I remember that now.
Yeah, no, this is something that I think we should close on and then wrap up over the course of the next 10 minutes. But should we participate in bourgeois elections? And what do you have to say about the arguments that we need to vote for X to stop Y? And that a vote for Biden, if you don't vote for Biden, you're voting for Trump. And we absolutely have to stop Trump because he is the worst of two evils. Like, what are your thoughts on lesser evilism? What do you have to say about that? Is what I'm
lesser evilism doesn't work, never was true, and no, I don't believe in that at all. Democrats are not moving left. We talked before about the movement against neoliberalism, the sort of the people, the Bernie Sanders and Rose Twitter who want to go back to 60s and 70s social democracy. There's no incentive for the capitalists to do that. The only thing that ever did any of this was, once upon a time I saw it as, the labor movement is what scared them into doing social democracy. Then I realized, I took a step back even from that, and I realized, the threat of communist revolution is the only thing that ever made the capitalists listen to the labor unions in the first place. So there's, as long as there's no actual threat of communist revolution, let alone a strong trade union movement, there's no incentive for them to go back to social democracy. It ain't happening. We saw the way they treated Bernie Sanders twice. So forget this whole, and Bernie's peddling it now that Joe's going to move left. Joe just was in a debate, and he just said he doesn't support Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. So forget it. No, I do not support lesser evil voting. I don't think that there's socialist theory of the masters who thought a lot about this to support that. What I see in Engels and what I came up with in the Vaush stream was socialists, Marxists should vote for socialist candidates. So yes, as a socialist, you should partake in the bourgeois elections, but only vote for socialists. I personally support voting green. That's kind of where I started, and I strayed from that a little bit. I've come back to it. I still think that it's, especially with Howie Hawkins' more firm stance on eco-socialism. I like a lot of the things that he envisions for the Green Party. I put up a audiobook of his pamphlet, The Case for an Independent Left Party. He basically wants to turn the Green Party into a dues-based mass member party. I think that would be excellent for the U.S. left. And you see these other things popping up, like the Movement for a People's Party. Can I just take a second to say, Movement for a People's Party are grifters who literally are duplicating what the Green Party is doing, but trying to water it down. Howie Hawkins said he talked to somebody involved with MPP, and they said that they thought the Green Party was too far left. So, I'm in the Marxist wing, I would say, of the Green Party. There is, slightly a more social democratic wing of it. But I think that socialists, yes, should vote Green. If you really want to vote PSL, I support Green just because they're in every state a bigger party. And I think that ultimately, I did a video on PSL versus Green. They have really similar platforms. And I think when the time comes, which probably is coming in the next 10 years, all leftists are going to have to get around the same platform in one organization. And I already see that PSL and Green are pretty much totally aligned. I know there's different ideology behind the scenes. PSL is more Marxist-Leninist. Green is less grounded in traditional Marxism. But you look at the demands, they're totally compatible. So that would be my advice.
They're very similar. I would say the main difference is, the PSL, the Greens are more social democratic, but the PSL are more genuinely socialist. The issue with the PSL is they're not on all the ballot boxes around the country.
I personally have reached out to PSL 3 times to get involved, and I literally heard crickets every time. So I don't know that they are ready as an organization to take on the mantle.
No. What I will say is, in terms of legal strategy, the stuff you can do above ground, it's good to support socialist parties, maybe not even Greens or like PSL and whatnot. Support the parties that believe, that support your best interest. Because let me tell you the issue with the whole lesser evilism strategy. The burden of proof lies on the party in power to showcase that they really are the better choice. And, it's on them to demonstrate that they're a good candidate and to, court and appeal to their base. And if they fail to court and appeal to their base, then, you can't blame the base for that. You have to blame the party that's trying to run for election, or the candidate that's running for election. So really, if the Democrats lose and Trump wins, it's actually their fault, not ours, because they didn't make a good enough case to their constituency that they are the better choice. And it's dumb to blame the voters when this is supposed to be a fucking democratic system where you vote for the candidate that best represents your interests. Now, frankly, everyone here that's watching this is woke, as well as you. We all know they don't represent our interests, and we know we're never going to win supporting a candidate that does. But I think it's really the principle that matters. You should really vote your conscience and vote out of principle and support the parties that best represent your interests. I'm getting a comment here that says that, they're fucking pro-imperialists. And I'm also getting a comment that says, what does PSL stand for? It's the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They are a Dengist party. Now, I'm not a Dengist. I'm not really part of the pro-China crowd. And, so S4A is part of the pro-China crowd. I'm not. And you know what? That's just a disagreement we have, and we can have a discussion about that at a later date. But besides that, I still consider him a comrade as well as the PSL. And they're still a hell of a lot better than a lot of the parties that exist, right now. I was part of the PSL for a while. I'm not anymore, but if, they were on the ballot in all 50 states, I would vote for them because I do think they have a good platform and I do think they have some revolutionary potential.
Yeah, let me just comment quickly on the pro-China thing. Am I on board with everything the Chinese government does? No, because I don't even know everything the Chinese government does. What I do think that is, for Marxists in 2020, we have to look at the examples and possibilities that are in front of us. And we have to say, does this possibly lead us out of capitalism? What can we learn from this? And, what can we get out of this? How do we take the next step from where we are standing right now? And I think that there is a lot going on in China that, whether it's all good or not, honestly offers hope. You look at what's going on in the US, I don't see hope. I see misery and chaos and instability and pain. what I do see in China is a fair number of promising things as well as a number of problematic things. I mean, that's because we live on Earth and things aren't all one way or all the other. So as a general comment, people need to drop the Maoist Dengist bullshit. We live in 2020, and we're talking in the United States or in Western Europe, countries that do not have socialism. When capitalists have revolutions, it's because capitalism is already built. There's already a capitalist infrastructure, and then boom, they finally just take over the state as the cherry on top. When socialists have revolutions, it's the opposite. We take power and then we start building socialism. So when China did that, like many decades ago, they have been building socialism, and they had different forks in the road, and they had different historical, things come up in their history that they had to deal with, different circumstances. Did they make the perfect choice every time? Were there setbacks? I mean, I don't think that it is our job in 2020 in the United States or Western Europe or wherever to be trying to relitigate that stuff. It's history. I think we need now to look at the future and say, what do we do next? And if you go onto like Twitter and like Hamsick Twitter, there's tons of, it's encouraging on the one hand to see lots of teenagers, many of whom have like anime profile pics, talking about communism and Maoism and Leninism and stuff, but getting caught up in making all the same old mistakes of infighting over these like petty disputes that happened in another country decades ago. You know what you need to do to pull your country out of capitalism? You need to look at what's going on around you, how you can work with people around you, and not like you're in part of some fucking fandom, have these idiotic disputes that just will lead you nowhere. And I cannot tell you how frustrating that is to see the prevalence of stuff like that going on when we're going to have another economic crash. Real families are going to wind up living in real motels because they get kicked out of their real apartments. And just now is not the time to be recreating these petty disputes. That is literally what the 1% wants. They want you to pick Team Mao or Team Deng when it literally is irrelevant to your situation and building socialism in the United States.
Yeah, and this is why a lot of splitting occurs, like because of disagreements over different historical events and so on. And frankly, I don't care like if I disagree with someone over different interpretations over the history. What I care about is the here and the now and the praxis and strategy. Like I'll tell you guys right now, the people that I've worked with most prominently and that I've gotten the most praxis done with have been anarchists. Now I am pretty far from an anarchist. I am, for all intents and purposes, an authoritarian socialist. But I've worked with these people and I'm willing to compromise. And the thing, like, we're not at a point to where we can split hairs in the movement over disagreements like this. Right now, I think we should all just agree that capitalism bad, and we need to figure out what we can do to change things. And based on my experience, I think direct action is important. Just partaking in direct activism wherever and whenever you can. If you can't join a union, if you aren't participating in a co-op, you should be doing direct action, even if it has nothing to do with anti-capitalism, just because it's an important struggle. You can radicalize your peers, slowly over time, just work with them, do harm reduction in the time being, and at the same time, support parties, third parties that actually represent your interest, campaign for them, vote for them, and so on. Don them money. I really think we should boycott the Democrats and the Republicans. We should be doing like a collective boycott of the two-party duopoly, because it's very clear and obvious that they don't serve their interests. Admittedly, the Democrats are more competent than the Republicans in some regards. The reason why I actually would prefer Trump to stay in power is specifically because I perceive him as America's Commodus. I see the Roman Empire on fast forward, or I see the fall of the Roman Empire on fast forward when I see Donald Trump. Like I know that's accelerationist, and I know that might seem reactionary to some, but it's very entertaining to like. I'm just saying, no president has done as much damage to the imperial core up to this point as Donald Trump.
I mean, George W. Bush did a lot. They thought with George W. Bush that they were still coming out of the more prestigious, like Trump is from the trash wing of the Republican Party. The George W. Bush wing was like the last gasp of air quotes respectable Republicanism. But I'm telling you, for people who are too young to really remember the George W. Bush years, literally the exact same discourse, well, at least about the actions, like the Patriot Act was brand new. The U.S. hadn't really overtly declared war on lots of countries in a long time. Like, it was fairly unprecedented, and the Republican Party was like shamed into the ground after that. Obama beat McCain like 2-1. I mean, it was the Republican Party's public image took a trouncing, which also led to the rise of the Tea Party, because since the air quotes respectable wing of the party they completely used up their goodwill with Bush and Cheney. They're like, all right, who do we got left? And all they had was the crazy proto-fascist Tea Party, which Trump came directly out of. Trump is at war with the more respectable, the Rockefellers, these very stable, long-term interests. He's like a carnival barker out there, like trying to get a buck today. He's in a lower class of the upper class. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just confusing to the working class that we have the elections every 4 years, because it's always this false hope. There's a ton of false consciousness that, I mean, in the classic sense, false consciousness is when workers think that they share the same interests as the capitalists. There's always this sense that even though they're Democrats or a 1% controlled party through and through, that, oh, just wait 4 years and then there's the possibility it'll get better. Well, I think that hopefully, at least, we're at a point now where, more people are seeing through that illusion than ever. The problem is, how do we organize people? I think what you said about joining organizations is important. I think also what I said earlier about, the amount of infighting in these organizations does need to come down. People don't join these organizations because they're like happy with how things are. You don't join a socialist organization because you're day-to-day happy. But
yeah, it doesn't matter to me whether or not you're like the most staunch Stalin supporter or you think the USSR was state capitalist, as long as you can show up to a protest and get shit done and you have a decent vision as to where we should go forward. I don't really care what what our disagreements are. I'm willing to debate those, and we can just keep those as disagreements as friends. But for now, we both agree capitalism bad, socialism good, so we should work towards that.
Yeah, and I will challenge everybody listening to this to, obviously, I mean, many socialists, communists, anarchists, whatever, we are intellectuals. Like, we do like thinking, we like information, we like knowledge. It's how we attain class consciousness and shaped it into something in many cases. And it's good that we debate with each other. It's good that we do vigorously debate ideas and reality, and we experiment and we, try to look at things in different ways. But for every hour that you spend or every minute that you spend online debating with people or whatever else, try to do at least a half an hour of something in the real world to keep yourself grounded and to keep, the debating and the arguments from getting totally out of control. I have been in organizations where I've had people come in with, internet consciousness, where they come into a real group and they're like a bull in a china shop because it's all about just winning this argument. And literally, I've seen groups that it took 2 or 3 years to build come unraveled because of that. And so, the debating's okay, but I think where the frustration really starts piling up is when we don't balance it with real world things. That is one of the reasons the George Floyd protests I was so relieved to see that happening. I'm like, finally, people are getting out in the streets and putting this frustration on who it belongs on. It belongs on the 1%, not on your comrades. So just keep that in mind, people. And yeah, I agree with anarchists on 75, 80% of stuff. I just happen to think that they haven't really thought through how to take power if we were ever to kick out the capitalists. But I do agree with them on a lot of stuff. We got to keep in mind, like you said, grounding in real world action and organization, remembering who your comrades are. But that also doesn't mean, from the other way, allowing rad libs to water down, to bludgeon us into watering down what we're saying because, we're being divisive. So there is a line to walk as well.
We're being too problematic. We're not doing mass popular appeal. We're too radical, so we need to water down the message. If you read too much theory, it's because you're too cult-like. And if you go by anarcho-syndicalism, too much theory is bad. It's kind of like the anti-intellectualism that I kind of rail against. Before we finish up, there's a video by
actually, but before you say that, you know what else it's exactly like is anyone who's a musician out there. It's when you suggest to people that they learn music theory so that they're not. Oh yeah, if you don't know how to cook, learn. That is good. I mean. So if you ever suggest to somebody that they learn music theory, they're like, no, man, it's going to kill my creativity. And what I always say to those people, I'm a musician, is like, look, you have a car, right? Does looking at a road map like hurt your driving? No. And do you have to follow the map exactly? No. But does it maybe give you shortcuts you didn't know about? Does it maybe give you a better picture of the whole terrain? Yes. That's why we learn theory, history, economics, philosophy, because it just helps us think better about the situation. It doesn't, kill your revolutionary spirit. Every time I read theory, I get more revolutionary. And let me just suggest, people are going to read one thing right now, Lenin, State, and Revolution. I think it's so applicable.
Yeah. The State and Revolution is a very important text because it outlines like the difference between a proletarian state and a bourgeois state, and how there's an equivocation that exists. There's an equivocation that exists between the anarchist conceptualization, or at the very least the traditional anarchist conceptualization of the state, and the Marxist conceptualization of the state. And I think to an extent that a lot of this debate is kind of spooky in a sense, and it's just kind of splitting hairs. And I think there's a lot of synthesis that can be arrived at. And I do think the anarchists have a point when it comes to some regards. I think a lot of anarchists, a lot of them just come into it kind of ignorant. Like they're anti-capitalists, but they don't really understand what socialism should and could entail and what it has to entail, at least from a historical standpoint. I'm not saying all anarchists are like this, but this is like my coming of age in a sense, because before I was a communist, I was an anarchist and I thought just like this. So
yes, well, same for me. And then literally one day, I was like a couple years into it, and then literally I was just doing some thinking on stuff, just thinking political stuff. And I remember writing down the sentence, how do anarchists take power? And that was kind of the beginning for me of moving beyond anarchism. It was a good foundation of why capitalism is wrong, why, mutual aid is good, why organizing, radical labor unions is good. But I realized, hey, if we ever kick out the capitalists, I didn't see a lot of good answers on what do we do. That is how I started becoming more Marxist-Leninist. I didn't become, I wouldn't say I rejected anything that I had learned previously from anarchists. I added to it because it's well, how do you make those ideas stick and become permanent? To me, that's where Marxism-Leninism comes in. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and finish with this just for entertainment's sake, just for fun. I'm going to share the whole screen. And what I'm going to do you see the 42 remain?
I do.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and play this because I think this is very pertinent to the current.
Do I see Vaush in the corner?
Yes, this is Vaush, and I think this is an important thing to review. I have another anti-Vaush action coming up next week. I want to try and get Danky Kang on for it because that would be very fun. Because Danky Kang is something of a Vaush zoologist, so to speak.
I've seen his videos, the principled leftist videos. Those are good.
Oh yeah. So theory is a cult. Let's hear what the galaxy brain Vaush has to say.
Can't wait.
Are you still an Anson? I haven't heard you mention it lately. I have found that if I describe myself as an Anson...
Can you hear it fine?
Yeah, I can hear it now.
Perfect.
Are you still an Anson? I haven't heard you mention it lately. I have found that if I describe myself as an anarchist or an anarcho-syndicalist, an inordinate amount of my time gets wasted by mouth-breathing dorks who have read way too much theory for their liking, trying to explain to me how X is impossible or I'm actually Y. The best thing that I can do for my brand is just call myself a libertarian socialist.
So what do you think of that? How he just sort of eschews the actual anarchists that have read their own theory and understand ideology and point out to him that, yo, you don't even prescribe to the core tenets of our ideology. So, like, why do you even call yourself an anarchist?
Yeah. I mean, I think Vaush is kind of a dumbass in the first place. Like, I don't think he's a smart person. He's smart enough to, or has enough CIA backing or whatever to like do what it is he does. I don't think he's a smart person. Listening the way he read the Marx and Engels quotes, even just talking there right now where he said read too much theory for their liking, that's just not how you use that phrase. So anyway, I don't generally respect Vaush's opinion, but on this thing of being an ANCOM or an ANSIN or a libertarian socialist, I think that it is a very comfortable position for a Western socialist to take because it's a way around the Cold War propaganda, particularly anti-Stalinist propaganda of like the New Left 50s and on, that is super thick. And it's like, you know, tantamount to supporting Hitler and that kind of stuff. I think it's an easy political position to take within the left. I don't think it, you know, as an actual position in reality holds up. So, I mean, and Marx and Engels wrote about this a lot. There's obviously On Authority by Engels, which, you know, just points out like a revolution is the changing of the guard in terms of which class rules society. It is a, you know, even if you have electoral parties that soften the process, it's usually a pretty forceful one. So this idea of like being libertarian, I've heard people share the idea that libertarian versus authoritarian is kind of like a bourgeois construct that you're trying to impose on socialism. I mean, I don't know if I totally agree with that, but I think overall it's a lazy position to take, because I think that usually when people say that they're libertarian socialist, they're saying it so that they don't have to actually defend harder but better positions.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head with that one, because it is easier to, you know, accept the CIA and liberal propaganda about AES and like the hardline points about Marxism. It is easier to reject that and accept the mainstream view and just eschew it and be like, oh, well, that's not real socialism, than being like, yes, Stalinist Russia, Castro's Cuba, and Mao's China are the legitimate interpretations and implementation of Marx's work and what it should look like. It's much easier to, you know, grift and be a part of the anti-communist bullshit than it is to actually like take a principled stance and defend a position, the correct position, no matter how popular it is. And with that being said,
I'll use an example, very micro scale example from my own life. I was a member of a worker cooperative for my job for a while, and it was a conversion process. So it was a business that used to be traditional, you know, hierarchical capitalist with a boss and workers and like a manager. And I was part of the effort to convert that business to a democratically functioning worker-owned business. And, you know, I did it for a while and read a lot of cooperative conversion literature. Essentially, we were building socialism in one workplace. Okay. I mean, and the amount of difficulty we had doing that, we started out saying, all right, we want 100% of the labor to be done by worker owners. That way we have no employees, even like part-time employees, so that no one's being exploited, everybody is participating, etc. Well, we did it that way for a couple of years, and it was like horrendously not working. And we had to have setbacks. We had to make adjustments. So we started with kind of an ultra position of saying we're going to do this 100% pure, and it didn't fucking work for a number of reasons I'd be happy to go into in another stream. But we had to accept a compromise position that actually did work. So rather than letting the whole thing fold, we had to take a few setbacks and make a few quasi-capitalist compromises. Yeah. I can't even imagine trying to run an entire country, what kind of compromise you have to make. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. And I actually talked about this in a scripted video I did not too long ago, where, like, say, the Bolsheviks originally had some radically democratic, radically progressive plans on where to take the country, and everything started to fall apart because the people in general were not ready, and the conditions in general were not ripe for the withering state in a higher phase of communism. So the Bolsheviks had to make some compromises on their original promises for the sake of the preservation of the regime.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to you have two things, I think, that are major. You have the economic engine that you have. For us at the co-op, it was like, how much money can this place actually make determines how much we can actually pay people and the health of the business as a business. Then, and it's the same for a country. Like, Russia was very backward. They had to take a couple of decades just to industrialize, just to get their economic engine going, the technology. Then you have the socialization of the workers, like the people of the USSR. They had grown up under a different system. They were socialized by a different system. You can't undo that. As much as you might like to wave a magic wand, you can't undo it overnight or even in 5 or 10 years. It just takes longer. The human brain just doesn't rewire itself that quickly. So, and in the case of the co-op, we had a lot of people who could not fathom the horizontal structure, and we had to accept some compromise just so that people had a business system that they could show up to work with every day. So, we might want the most ultra position there is and not be able to do it despite having all the seemingly a lot of the pieces in place.
Yeah. I want to play the rest of this clip. Are you there?
Sure.
My beliefs are exactly the same, but holy fuck, I am not wasting my time with these people, okay? Jesus Christ.
No, but he'll waste his time with whatever the fuck's on the screen there.
Yeah, he's a gamer now. He's cashing in.
Seem like we really are in a cult? Yes, that's why I never push that shit.
Hold up a second.
Are in a cult? Yes, that's why I never push that shit. Theory is great to read if you want to. You can get a lot from it. I'm not denying that. But holy fuck, dude. When people are like, I'm a leftist, what are some things I should know? And people are like, here are the books you need to read. This one was written in 1895. This in 1913. These will give you all the principles you will need to be good lefty. Like, holy fuck. It makes us seem like lunatics.
No, it doesn't. It makes us seem
No,
like...
it doesn't.
No, it makes us seem like intellectuals because we actually care about the facts and the knowledge that we're trying to present. And in order to be a good Marxist, in order to be a good leftist, you actually have to understand key, core, critical, complex topics and contents in order to solidify and reaffirm your positions. So when he says this shit, it's very, very anti-intellectual to me. How can you rail against the right wing for being anti-intellectual and then tell people they're lunatics for suggesting that you read books?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm not going to take somebody that seriously who is giving his political thoughts over a video game apparently intended for 4-year-olds. So, what he brings up here, first of all, 3 points. One, a cult. Honestly, if anyone listening to me talking, do I sound like a brainwashed cult member or do I sound like somebody who's capable of independent critical thought? Hopefully the latter. I think the latter. I try to self-reflect reasonably often and make sure I'm not falling into too many traps. Honestly, the Vaush people will bend over backwards. The few times that I have interacted with his fan base, there's some of by definition the most cultish people where they will perform all kinds of mental gymnastics, bend over backwards, make excuses, justifications, rationalizations, just to like take things Vaush said that made no sense or self-contradictory and to just explain them away. That's cult behavior. So, but again, Vaush is one of many. He brought up the old trope of theory was written a long time ago, therefore it doesn't matter anymore. This is both true and not true. It is largely not true. The only thing where it is true is, like I said before, in Marx's day, nobody had tried to build socialism yet, so there were fewer examples to work from. So we have improved somewhat. But that said, why it's largely not true, Marx was Dr. Marx. He was an extremely learned person. If he hadn't had rigorous academic education, he wouldn't have been able to do the kind of analyses of the Wealth of Nations and other economic treatises and data that he was able to do. So Marx wasn't, pulling it out of his ass. But beyond that, capitalism runs on pretty simple logic. Yes, you do need to spend a lot of time if you're going to trace it down to every level that it goes into, or follow the logic out in every way. But at its core, you've basically got very simple logic. That is why that's why capitalism has remained largely unchanged. Only really the technology and politics around it have become more sophisticated over, the last 200 years. But capitalism itself, the laws aren't that different. The property relations themselves are pretty much the same. So no, it holds up for that reason.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
The system is largely the same as it is 100, 150 years ago.
Oh, you're dropping out again. Well, while fellow traveler is apparently out, I'll just say on the lunatics thing, this is Vaush just trying to
the more advanced that
people who are, better than he is. I don't know. That's just Vaush being lazy and just doing ad homs. He likes to do these very vitriolic, they're lunatics, they're nuts. Just these randomly emphasized words. The guy's a joke. Your audio is still not there, FT.
You're back.
Oh, you're back.
No, I'm back. Wait, no, hold on, whatever.
And Vaush is gone.
No, he'll be back real quick.
Okay.
Here, let me go ahead and pull him back up again.
Okay, there we are.
Well, it's good to understand your ideology. Yeah, but that doesn't make it a prerequisite, and you can understand your ideology without reading 150-year-old books. That's not. Nobody else does this. No other political movement does this.
You know who didn't do this? Marx and Engels. Marx and Engels didn't run around going, if you want to be a socialist, you have to go ahead and read Capital.
Wrong!
Yeah, they literally did. Every socialist party has a syllabus. That is completely wrong.
Wrong! No. Marx and Engels were extremely critical of their contemporaries. They talked about bourgeois socialism. They talked about market socialism. They talked about various strains of socialism. In fucking Marx's work, The Poverty of Philosophy, he was shitting on Proudhon, or criticizing Proudhon, for his takes and his conception of what socialism should look like. Marx was very critical of his contemporaries, and this is a load of bullshit.
Yeah, Marx, Engels, and Lenin were more or less the wrecking balls who came into the already existing world of socialism, which was largely, what they called utopian. And they were like, look, we're going to satirize, criticize, and clean up this movement so that we can weaponize it for revolution. That's what they did. And like you said, if you go read Marx and Engels and Lenin, a lot of their works is commentary and criticism of other socialists with whom they had some things in common, but whose work they felt was what they called utopian, flawed in that it was too idealistic and not materialistically oriented enough. And largely, I think you could what Marx did, he didn't invent the idea of being anti-capitalist, but they did systematize and like take the best of all the workable bits of what had come before. And they also synthesized and added so much in that process. As far as no other political movement requiring this level of thought, I mean, yeah, you can go join like the Proud Boys and all you have to do is like not masturbate and hate minorities. Does that make them a better movement? Like, I don't get the criticism. What point's he trying to make?
You also have to get the shit kicked out of you while naming your favorite brands of cereal, apparently.
I mean, I think that's important. Like, so this idea that other political parties don't make you learn things, therefore they're superior. Well, no, that just means that other political movements are more likely to uphold the status quo because they're not rigorously challenging the many deceptive and confusing tentacles that the status quo has put out there to maintain their own power. If it was easy to, overthrow the existing order, it would have been done long ago.
Oh, yeah. Anyways.
And the reason it hasn't happened is because we're insisting people read too many books. The reason it hasn't happened is because of a lack of discipline, of a lack of militancy, of this idea that you can just like play it by ear. You really can't. And Marx and Engels and Lenin demonstrated that very directly in their writing. So
no, if you're a committed revolutionary, this is something that's on your mind all the time. This is the kind of work that consumes you, the kind of work that makes up the very essence of your being. And to be a good revolutionary is to be a doomed man. It is to be someone who fights for a better world in the face of annihilation, against all odds, against all costs, and is desperately fighting, using what few tools you have, be it theory or agitation or organization, to make the world a better place. It isn't just like something casual. Like, this is like the mindset of a Menshevik. Like what Vaush is advocating. Doesn't this sort of sound like the mindset of a Menshevik, or we're just sort of like these weekend warrior revolutionaries? This isn't really something we like push for or make like the very essence of our being.
Yeah, and what he's saying will lead us nowhere as a movement, and that's the bottom line.
Oh yeah.
And by the way, I liked what you said, and if it was a YouTube comment, I'd give it a thumbs up.
They wrote the fucking Communist Manifesto, which was meant to be understood by peasants of that day. They weren't that dumb. Can you imagine how far socialism would have gone if they were like, actually, we don't really want to associate with any quote-unquote leftists who don't even read theory?
They literally did, though.
That doesn't.
They literally did say that. I mean, the German ideology is literally a book exactly about that by Marx.
Yeah, and isn't Anti-Düring like this really long-ass critique of Marx's contemporaries, or a defense of Marx's work by Engels after his death?
Yeah, I mean, much of the early Marx and Engels stuff is attacks on idealism, because they were trying first, they were very oriented toward practical action, but like a lot of their early effort was making waves within the philosophy circles, specifically supplanting idealism with materialism. That is like so much of their effort goes into, pointing out some of the good points that idealist philosophers were making, like Hegel. I mean, dialectics comes from Hegel, but a lot of their writing was about how we need to supplant idealism with materialism. And like that as an effort in philosophy was something they were trying to do to shift the thinking, really ultimately to pave the way for real world practical action. And they devote an enormous amount of time and energy to it. So what Vaush is saying, again, he's some dipshit who just plays video games for a living. There's nothing wrong with that, I guess. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But like, he's good at the Teletubby video games. He's not good at this. And I don't know why you would listen to somebody, just, judge him on his merits. I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. what Vaush says as a political analyst or figure doesn't add up. It's lazy, half-assed garbage. And like, coming full circle here, like the Vaush video that I did picking apart his attempt at, citing Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mao in support of Joe Biden, it's like he hasn't even read the stuff he's criticizing. And then when he does read it, he looks like a complete dumbass.
I like this take right here, not this one. But Jenny Lynn, you are looking very beautiful in this picture. But anyways, Vaush has never read Marx. Everything he does is to deflect from the fact that he has literally no idea what he is talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I totally agree. That's what I was just saying. It's like every time, like he talks all this shit about it, and then when he's actually confronted with it, he like has nothing to say because he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about.
No. What he'll do is he'll mute your mic, talk over you, and then kick you out of the chat because he has no way to respond to you. And that's the way he wins debates, really.
Well, air quotes wins. I mean, I saw the thing he did with Caleb Maupin. That was embarrassing. I mean, honestly, if I was Caleb, Caleb does what Caleb does, but I mean, if that had been me in me being me up against Vaush, and Vaush was talking to me the way that Caleb was, I would have said, 10 minutes in, like, look, this isn't a debate. Like, you can't just be like wantonly like swearing at your opponent and there's like no moderation. Like, that's not a debate. That's Vaush trying to score points with his audience for just being like, whatever the like 28-year-old or like however the fuck old he is, like he's trying to be the coolest kid in 8th grade. Like that's what Vaush was doing in that debate. Just have like attitude. He's trying to make up with attitude for what he lacks in knowledge. And it's just, unfortunately, it's like Donald Trump. Like he can get up there and like make some idiotic comment and his base eats it up because they don't fucking care about truth or like, like verifying knowledge or facts or anything. They just care about like who looked cool, not accounting for facts. It's the same kind of thing. And I think you've dropped out again. I can't hear you if you're talking.
Hello?
I can hear you now.
All right, cool. So I have no further comments besides I have a Twitter. I really ought to message Vaush and like offer the debate him over this shit because I acknowledge that if I were to do that, it would net a lot of traffic to my channel. You know? I mean, I'm at this point where any publicity is good publicity. And if I can get like 100,000, 200,000 people looking at me, then that'll boost me up and that will increase my capacity to promote channels like you.
Which I appreciate.
Because one of the reasons why I started Chaos Under Heaven is because I want to promote smaller socialist channels, like real genuine like channels that I consider genuinely like a leading light on a path to communism. And they're of course among the other reasons. And when I found your video on him, and I found it like very, very good, very, very underrated, by the way. Like you've got Hakeem or Bad Empanada that have responded, but I feel like your deconstruction out of all of them was without a doubt the best one. So as we wrap up here, because I do want to end it now.
Sure.
I do suggest everybody, I will link S4A's channel in the description, Socialism for All. I suggest you guys check him out. He's got a lot of good stuff. I highly recommend it. He talks about like how the Bernie Sanders campaign was a total sheepdog's game, how the Democrats are nothing but opportunists and careerists, how we should really be building a third party and supporting a third party, and what we should be doing now. And I think I think the work that you do is important, and I really, really encourage you to continue.
Well, thanks. And, what you were saying about, you're in a place where you want to do things like debate Vaush and get a lot of eyes on. I think that's great. And I think anybody who, can do that should do that. I personally, I don't know, there may have been a point where I was more up for that stuff. I can definitely say at this point, I so personally don't have the patience for it. S4A started actually more on Facebook, and then I branched out into YouTube. And I just have absolutely no fucking patience for people who come with bad ideas and don't want to learn. So, which of course the internet is a great amplifying force for voices like that, because they can just be kind of a thorn in your side. And I'm very liberal with the ban features. So, that you can do that. That is great, because there's always going to be those of us who just don't have the fucking I don't know that I could sit down with Vaush and just have him be creepy all over me for an hour.
Oh yeah, freaking talking to him, and then out of nowhere he starts rapping about how pedophilia is okay and socially acceptable. I have another anti-Vaush.
There's no place for people like Vaush. There's just no place in socialism for people like Vaush. And you know what? When we get done with Vaush, we should definitely move on to, there's a lot of other, I called out Movement for a People's Party. There's a lot of people who need to be taken down.
Well, with this guy, first, yes, Red Dundonian is the one who suffered. He suffered through that, and he wants the shout out. So here's your shout out, dog.
There you go.
Collecting the clip of the bullshit when I would not. Thank you for being complicit in my laziness and finding that. Appreciate it.
People like Red Dundonian doing that work are the foot soldiers. Not everybody can or should have a channel. Somebody's got to watch and do the the research and share the links and stuff. So,
Oy vey, you found me out. Oh shit!
What is this shit?
He found me out. Now I have to code switch. You call me out like this really gives me really bad anxiety, which triggers really bad gas. You figured me out. I am in fact Jewish. Fuck.
So socialism for all works for Jews, and so do you, fellow. So, all right, you've attracted a fascist. Go fuck yourself. You're completely wrong. You work for the 1%. That's the only people you're helping. I mean, does that even work anymore? Do you get new recruits doing Jew bashing? Does that even work?
No. It works among people that are already right wing in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a fucking echo chamber.
That's really what it is. The people that are already center or left wing are going to be more drawn towards us in the grand scheme of things, because when you have a group of people that are getting their skulls bashed out and getting shot by rubber bullets and tear gas to keep you from getting evicted out of your homes, and then you got the Proud Boys on the other side, by the cop side, telling you that you're subhuman and you shouldn't have single payer health care, who do you think the public is going to side with in that situation?
Yeah, all those fucking militia, vigilante, right-wing Proud Boy, they just wannabe cops. That's all they are. They're just they just want to serve the 1% in a boogaloo shirt. That's really all they're about.
All right, cool. So
it's like Dress Down Friday for the cops.
Hold on a second, we got a troll. You know what? Fuck it. I'll just ban you. That works.
There you go. There you go. I'll applaud that.
Mr. Nazbol has been banned.
There you go.
Anyway.
And by the way, Nazbol, is that even really a thing? I mean, is that just a creation of 4chan or something? Is that an actual phenomenon in the world? Maybe I'm just ignorant on the subject, but it seems
it's conservative Bolshevism.
But is that really where does that actually come from in the real world? I mean, is it? It seems like COINTELPRO kind of shit, because they always do. I did 9/11 truth stuff, which is surprising to me, somewhat controversial on the left. It seemed obvious to me this was another imperialist ploy for right-wing wars, whatever. Then like the libertarians and like Fash get into it, and I'm like, what the, you know, but this is always what they do. They put out the anti-Jewish stuff, and it's like such like a pat. It confused me at the time anyway, because I was younger, and then I was like, oh, this is just what somebody explained to me. It's what COINTELPRO like does to be divisive, is they start. So anytime you see people going on with the anti-Jewish stuff, forget it. I mean, they just literally quarantine that person and just, you know, mark them as a troll for the rest of your community. Well, I'm sorry, not just a troll, but like a probable like cop.
Yeah,
too.
I just ban fascies. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. This has been a very productive conversation. One of the most
I enjoyed
productive
it.
conversations with anyone I've had on my channel. Would you be interested in coming on again sometime?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you and Wicker. Wicker was on one of my last live streams, but I feel like you two would have a lot in common.
Okay.
I do think it's time to wrap up. Thank
Sure.
you guys for watching. Make sure to check out Socialism for All's channel. Watch his destruction of Vaush with faction logic. Great dude. Very, he's FT approved. And I will see you guys as soon as I have my new video out, which will be probably next week. Bye-bye. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I'll